This video discusses religious discrimination in the American workplace. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act attempts to address this by insisting that employers shield their employees from bias. Employees can experience the same types of persecution based on religion as other protected groups, including harassment, failure to hire, and termination. I won't give legal advice, but stick around and I'll discuss the two most common ways that religious discrimination occurs. The first way religious discrimination happens is because an employee or employer treats an employee poorly because of animosity towards the employee's religion or religious beliefs. The second is when an employer fails to accept responsibility to provide certain reasonable accommodations to employees. Religious beliefs must be sincere to be covered by Title VII. Sincere beliefs include faithfully adhering to the tenets of a major religion like Protestantism or Judaism, Seventh-day Adventism, or Islam. Sincerely held moral and ethical beliefs are protected even if the beliefs are not part of an established religion or are not shared by all members of the employee's religion. Atheism, or the lack of religious beliefs, is similarly protected by Title VII. Beliefs that are not religious in nature, like social, political, and economic beliefs, are not protected. The most common violation for rights for devout employees is the failure to accommodate. When an employee's religious belief conflicts with the functioning of the workplace, the employer must bend a little. As you may recall from the first video in this series, a change to an employee's work situation so that an employee's religious practices may continue unimpeded is a reasonable accommodation. Once an employer becomes aware of the need for a reasonable accommodation, it must provide one. The need for a religious accommodation stems from an employee's religious practices, beliefs, and obligations. Some common examples are wearing certain clothing, following certain grooming practices, and attending Saturday temple services. In contrast to religious beliefs, employers are not required to accommodate some secondary activities related to a religion. For example, attending a church-sponsored social function is not a religious practice, belief, or obligation. An accommodation of religious beliefs that interferes with an employer's operations more than a little places an undue hardship on the employer. An employer does not have to provide an accommodation that causes an undue hardship. Finding a reasonable accommodation should be a joint effort between you and your employer. Your employer will likely learn of your need for a reasonable accommodation through your request. Your employer is permitted a reasonable amount of time to respond to the request. Your employer may then enter into a dialogue with you to establish the need for or the appropriateness of an accommodation. Your participation in the process is necessary to achieve success, but the responsibility falls on your employer to offer a reasonable accommodation. Your employer may propose a reasonable accommodation that you do not prefer. Your employer does not have to provide the accommodation you desire or even the best accommodation. Your employer needs only to provide a reasonable accommodation. Accommodations can take a variety of forms depending on the need. Scheduling conflicts are prime candidates for reasonable accommodations. Unions must also comply with requests for accommodations. A union cannot block your employer from providing you with a reasonable accommodation, although it's not required to alter the terms of its collective bargaining agreement with your employer. The duty to provide a reasonable accommodation extends to job applicants, and refusing to hire an individual because they need a reasonable accommodation during the application process is illegal. If you're finding this information helpful, click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on getting the information you need. Religious harassment at work can manifest through in-jokes, slurs, and political views. Certain heated issues can quickly polarize the workplace, like divorce or abortion. For harassment to break the law, it has to be sufficiently severe and frequent that a reasonable person and you yourself believe it creates a hostile work environment. Your employer must know of the harassment and fail to take prompt and effective action to be held liable. My video on sex discrimination and harassment provides a detailed explanation of what you need to prove for a hostile work environment. Employers' grooming and appearance policies can conflict with an employee's religious beliefs or practices. For example, a no-beard policy can have a disparate impact on Sikh employees whose religion prohibits them from cutting their beards. An employee whose religious beliefs dictate the wearing of particular clothes, head coverings, or jewelry that are impermissible under an employer's appearance policy may request a reasonable accommodation. In certain situations, religious discrimination is perfectly legal. Corporations, associations, educational institutions, and societies with a religious affiliation can give preferential treatment to their members. The organization has to be owned or operated by a church or religious body. For a decision of one of these employers to be covered by the exemption, the reason for the decision must be based on religious principles. For example, a Catholic university can require that its faculty be Catholic because teachers may be providing religious instruction. This same exemption would not apply to other positions at the university, such as maintenance staff or administrative assistants. Typically, lay employees are covered by other anti-discrimination laws, but these other laws do not apply to the relationship between a religious body and its religious leaders. Owners do not have a license to engage in a personal crusade to inject religious principles into their business. A firm without a formal religious affiliation who imposes a spiritual dimension into its workplace risks violating the law. Now you know all about discrimination based on religion. If you would like to know more about another protected class, like disability, check out the appropriate video in this series. Otherwise, check out the video about retaliation. You need to know how to be protected when complaining about discrimination. If this information was useful to you, please click the like button. And lastly, if you've experienced discrimination based on your religion or needed an accommodation for your religion and have any tips that might be helpful to others, please leave them in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in.